Hello everyone and welcome to this live roundtable discussion today brought to you by Provost Studio. I'm your host Tyler Kern. Now today we're going to hear from four people who all played different but pivotal roles in the creation of the new FOX5 DC-Studios. So this is going to be a really fun opportunity to learn about the process for collaborating and working together to create a new state-of-the-art studio. We'll hear about some of the challenges, some of the opportunities, some of the things that each of these guys learned and how their roles all fit together to help bring this to life. And so let's meet our panel of experts today. Joining us first and foremost is Peter Provost, the President and Director of Design at Provost Studio. Peter, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks very much. Appreciate the team joining as well.
Absolutely. Let's introduce the rest of the cast of characters here on the show today. Next, we have Ben Jacobson. He's a project manager and top dog at Scenic Studios. Ben, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks for hosting us.
Absolutely thrilled to have you. Next, we have Tony Siniscalco. He is the systems designer and project manager, senior systems designer and project manager at the Lighting Design Group. Tony, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, I'm glad to be here.
Very, very good. And finally, last but not least, we have Jim Landy, the founder of AV Design Services, LLC. Jim, welcome to the program. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks very much for having us.
Absolutely. So let's start off here, guys. I would love to hear from each of you just to learn a little bit more about your company and the role that you are in with your particular company. So Ben, let's start off with you. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your role, and what you do at Scenic Studios.
Sure. So I'm a project manager, as you mentioned, for Mystic. We've been in the business for about 30 years, just outside of Boston, doing custom design and fabrication for any number of projects. Started off more in the theatrical world, corporate events, trade shows, but for the past 15 years or so, we've been getting more and more heavily into broadcast, whereas now it's the majority of what we do. So I started off as a carpenter on the shop floor, worked my way up, started drawing, working on the CNC equipment, and now project managing. So we get to take Peter's brilliant designs and take them from a concept, from sketches, and help turn them into a reality. Everything from figuring out materials to how we break it down to fit it in a truck, make sure it fits in the elevator, to reassemble it. And over the past several years, more and more relying more and more heavily on LED lighting within the studio scenery. So we do a lot of that as well. A lot of woodwork, metalwork, carpentry, and then the electrical.
Excellent stuff. So Peter, Ben mentioned you there. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about what you do at Provost Studio, what it means to be a director of design, and how you guys fit into the overall picture of how a project like this all comes together?
Yeah, sure. I'll make it brief. We basically bring the team together. Yes, we establish the vision. Yes, we're officially responsible for executing the project from soup to nuts. But at the end of the day, I like to think of us as the orchestrator of it all in terms of bringing the right people on for the right job. So my role as a director of design for Provost Studio, responsible for obviously the quality and the trajectory of the design, but then also managing client expectations and getting the team together, the right team together for the project.
Excellent stuff. So Tony, tell us a little bit about the Lighting Design Group then, and how you fit into this overall project.
The Lighting Design Group is a conglomeration of lighting designers. All of us have been together for a long time. I've been part of LDG for 8 years. Primarily, we light television studios, newscast studios primarily. And that goes back at least, I think, to 92 in that time frame. The division that I'm a part of is the infrastructure division. We call it the systems division. We're in charge of building new production spaces, whether they be television studios, podcast studios, webcast studios. We also do a bit of architectural design and corporate studios, so corporate multi-purpose rooms, conference rooms, etc. And then in the end, our goal is to hand it off to our lighting designers, our production department, to light television shows, to light news shows. So we sort of work hand in hand with our production department. In terms of what we're doing on projects like this, it's my job to design the broadcast lighting infrastructure in terms of data distribution, power distribution, and support, whether it be lighting pipe grids or lighting pipe positions, unistrut positions, whatever may be necessary depending on each individual project. And then to sit through hours and hours of construction meetings over 1 or 2 years in order to make sure that it's implemented correctly, and fight all those battles, whether they be with architects, engineers, contractors, etc., to make sure that the studio has what it needs to light it properly.
Excellent stuff. And Jim, wrap us up and tell us a little bit more about yourself and also AV Design Services and the different services that you provide and what you did on this project.
AV Design Services, we provide and specialize in display technologies. So on the set, there may be flat panels, there may be lots of LED walls, there may be the displays on the front of desk, any number of different things. Our job specifically when we get involved in something like this is we'll get a set of plans from someone like Peter, and then we will look everything over, and basically we'll start value engineering from day one. But the most important task in there is to make certain that Peter's vision and what he's discussing with the client, it can become a reality within a viable price range, right? So sometimes there's a lot of technology on a set to start with, and then it might dwindle down to something that's more reasonable as far as prices are concerned. But what's important is that we have to ensure that what's going on in the control room can pass all the way through from control onto the set, and there are a means and method to which everything can flow to the different display systems on the set. That's critical mass as far as we're concerned. A lot of times as technology changes, and it's always changing, every time we start a new project, we're tasked with new demands to make sure that the quality of the display and the technology and the signals and the content and the content creation and the workflow associated with all of that is realized by the client and realized by the different designers. That's where it comes to working with Tony for lighting. We want to make sure that Tony's lighting isn't interfering with the quality of our displays, and that's where Tony comes in, and he's great at it because we're all used to doing this. We do this for a living, and the same thing with Ben. Ben is responsible for basically fabricating everything on the set below the grid and sometimes even up into the grid, where we have to assure that everything's going to be safe and everything's going to be hung square, even, and done properly, so that we don't have any issues. I'm sure you've seen some nasty videos online of display walls falling down and things of that nature. Well, it's all important that it all comes together, and we all have to work together to make sure that everything comes together in a cohesive way.
So, Peter, kind of being at the hub of this wheel for a project like this, how important is it to choose the right people for a project, the right people for a job? We're talking to these three guys here today, but why is it important to choose people that you trust and that that you can work with in this type of a situation on this type of a project?
Yeah, I think probably the most important thing, the most important reason is actually the unknown, to be honest. I think we like to partner with obviously people that we feel like know their stuff and are experts in their field, but I think it's more in conjunction with that is just as much about being able to think on your feet, think critically, be part of the team, and obviously have the client come first and all that. And, broadcast is fast. It happens really fast. And I think that our feeling is that, yes, we need to pick the right partner that can deliver the product. But at the end of the day, it's also about the process of how we work, which is super important to us. And, by default, it kind of ends up to be a benefit. And I think, I don't want to say a selling point, but it's the way we work, right? The mode of operation. So,
yeah, I like to say it's the four legs that hold up this stool, right?
Yeah.
So you have design, you have lighting, you have fabrication, and you have tech.
Yeah, yep. And I think the other thing that, aside from the thinking on your feet and the unknown, is we're starting to be, as we do more and more design build projects, which is probably 90% of what we're doing these days. Because I'm trained as an architect, and my background relative to building systems, we're being brought in earlier and earlier in projects. And so all of the guys that are sitting around the table here all know how to put together a project from the very beginning, from scratch, right? So knowing and understanding and anticipating both what's needed on an infrastructure level that's like behind the camera, but then also what's needed in front of the camera. And, I think that it's not just about being at the top of your game, but to be able to work collaboratively is super important.
And be flexible.
Yeah.
One of the great things that I think training wise that brought me into this field is I made the transition from touring theater to permanent infrastructure, and being able to take a show on the road and being in 300 different venues and seeing that, what works in one venue doesn't work in another, and having to come up with in a very short period of time a new way or a new approach to make the same effect, and from a different point of view or a different approach, makes you think on your feet very quickly. And taking a production job, which is, any broadcast is a production job, but putting it into a construction environment where you have to design the studio and that is going to hold the show, makes for a challenging approach, because construction moves slowly, production moves quickly, and someone has to stand on that wall and lead construction in the right direction, and fight the battles that that hold the four walls of the studio to the size that it needs to be to fit the scenery, to fit the vision, etc. And so I'm constantly looking not just at what the lighting infrastructure it is, but what's the HVAC infrastructure? What's the where are the sprinkler pipes? How are they run? How is the conduit run? It can't be run, wherever contractors may feel it needs to be. So we're constantly looking at things in BIM models and CAD drawings and trying to make sure that everything is lined up the way it ought to be, so that we can maintain our grid height, which allows us to maintain the scenic height.
I think a perfect example, and I'll toot Tony's horn here for a second. So what's interesting is, on a construction site, yes, there's fabrication drawings, yes, there's construction drawings, but things happen, right? And so as an example with the Fox job, things, building systems, it's not, installing these things is not an exact science. And so, when you go to site and things are a little bit different than anticipated, somebody in Tony's position could say, no, that's not the way the drawings are. That's not what we talked about. Let's do it this way. But I think that talking about the flexibility that we were talking about before, a guy like Tony and LDG has the ability to say, okay, yes, we thought about it doing this way, but the on-site expectation or the on-site situation is something different. Let's creatively think about how we can still meet, yes, the budget, yes, the schedule, yes, the parameters of the project, but also, adapt. And that's super important. All three of these gents are able to do that. So.
Ben, you've been suspiciously quiet, and I'd love to hear a little bit more from you over there. Just to learn a little bit more about the collaboration that goes on and how everyone works together in this type of a setting, and how maybe the challenges that you come up against in a project are either made better or worse depending on the level of collaboration and the level of communication amongst the team, like the rest of you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. Collaboration is key. And as Tony was saying, it starts in those design drawings and what the space allows and how big the room is. And as we all know, best laid plans, don't always work out. And during the installation, you may find out that, well, the wall should have been here, but such and such happened. And, you lose 6 inches of space on this side. And then the sprinkler pipe that was supposed to run here couldn't that way. So it had to drop down. And what are those cascading effects and how do they affect us all? Once we're past that and we know what we're doing and where it's going, Jim mentioned earlier, like the value engineering, there's all sorts of different options for monitors and video tiles. And, depending on what's available and what's in the budget, Peter will lay out, what this wall, wants to be, aesthetically how it should look. And then it's up to us to pick the right, materials and say, well, the video tile comes in a fixed size, so it's actually going to be this big. We need this much clearance. And then, how do we make sure that when we build the wall and leave a hole for Jim to mount the video into, that we know it all works. So there's a lot of communications. There's weekly project calls that everybody's on, and then we, and then several offline discussions. Going then with lighting, everything that we're building, we want it to be seen, we want it to look great, and it can't happen without great lighting design. You gotta light it up, you gotta see it, and we need them to take control and operate the lighting we're putting into the set. So what kind of fixtures are we using? What kind of tape? How are we powering it? LED tape, while it's low voltage, takes a lot of power. The power supplies add up quickly, adds up to lots of circuits. We got to get power distribution down to where we want to place our dimmers, and then have Tony take control of them and address them so that it's something meaningful that the lighting board can take over and operate properly. So it's a lot of work, and it's also it's pretty rewarding when you get to see it all come together. And after being on a project for a year and overcoming challenge after challenge, to see it go live on air, and it's a pretty special thing.
In the right light, and right, Tony?
We also need to collaborate very early on, because we need to figure out what kind of power and how much power scenic lighting is going to require, and where they're going to need data drops. And we want to make sure that in our infrastructure design that they're there. And the other thing is, we work well enough together that we look out for each other. So if I'm on site and I see something that's going to affect Ben's dimensions, I let him know when he's on site. And when he sees something on site when I'm not there, that might affect our lighting positions, he'll let me know. And I think that kind of coordination is key, but also sequencing is key, because we know that scenic has to go in before our lighting fixtures are hung, but we may have to do a pre-cable in order to get around scenic or get cables in position before scenic goes in. So we work together in how best to sequence the installation as construction is phasing itself out and production is ramping up.
And I think another important part is not just, we're designing for this current set, but we also want to design for future expansion, right? So
Absolutely.
Just because you don't think you're going to do anything over there, Tony's oftentimes saying, well, we're going to put stuff there anyway, and, it's there if we need it in the future. So, try to look ahead for the client and not block that, that opportunity, because there are big scenic walls that block access to the studio walls, but, that we know that there's power drops, there's infrastructure. There's a way to get there if we need to. So when they come up, we've been using the studio for a few months, and now we think we'd like to do XYZ. We're able to jump into that for them.
One of the things that we haven't mentioned yet, I know we're all talking about how we collaborate, but I have to be honest. I mean, all of us have been doing this enough that, we can operate the way we operate, but if we don't have the right client on board that either A, expects it, and B, appreciates and supports us when that unknown happens, it's just not as successful of a project. And I have to say that now we're in our 9th year as a practice, and I've been happy to say that we've had some really great clients, and I have to say that the job that we just finished here with the team in DC for Fox has been exceptional. So anyway, I just want to throw that in. It does take, for a successful project, not just, you know, the broadcast team, right? It also takes the architectural and engineering team, but most importantly, you got to have the right client for the process.
It's true. Well, we all understand that broadcast is mission critical, right?
Yeah, the show has to go on.
If it's horrible, you're out of work.
You're going to hear about it.
So it's got to be the best you can make it, or you're not going to get any more work.
Absolutely. So, and going back on to what Ben was saying about future proofing, we do our studio design as if it's a 4-wall black box, and everything that comes in and out over the next 40 years, we have to prepare for in the beginning. So, you know, one of my favorite sayings that clients have is, "Oh, we'll never shoot in that direction." And we all know that they're going to shoot in that direction eventually. So I have to make sure that there's power and data available there when they end up shooting where they didn't think they were going to shoot, because while we've done this multiple times, multiple studios over the last, I can't even count them how many times. And I've worked with Ben on a number of jobs. I've worked with Jim on a number of jobs, worked with Peter on a number of jobs. A client will only build a new studio once, maybe twice in their career. So we bring the collective experience of multiple projects together.
We do this for a living, right? We do this every day. Right.
So to that end, then, Tony, maybe we'll start with you with this question, but I'd love to hear from everybody on this. When it comes to clients and working with clients, and maybe what they know or what they don't know heading into a project like this, what's something maybe that clients should know heading into this that might not be common knowledge, but you'd like for them to at least have thought through on a certain level that maybe most clients just, it's not readily available information, but you can maybe tell them, hey, in the future, if you're thinking of adding a new studio, here are some things you should think through on the front end.
Take your schedule and add about 10% more days to it for what ifs, because there's going to be what ifs. And my favorite analogy is that you have to break some eggs to make an omelet. And building a new studio is sort of an organic experience in that you've got so many moving pieces that have to all come together correctly. And so you have to have your architect with his vision for the space itself. And then you have the scenic designer with his space, with his vision for what the scenic shot is, what's seen on camera. And then you have the engineers who are trying to get their power, data, heat, fire alarms, you know, everything that needs to be on that side. And HVAC, of course, which has the biggest infrastructure of anybody, but just pushes air, is always in the way. But we have to work with all of these things, and all of them have their own issues. And as we found out, even a brand new building going up has its own issues that may not have been anticipated on our end, but you know, there are things that we have to throw in there and account for. You know, whether, you know, can the floor hold the weight of the scenic design? Can the slab above hold the weight of the broadcast lighting grid and our fixtures, as well as all the scenic technology that's going to be hung as well? And what are those limits, and how can we best maximize the usefulness of that studio and the life of that studio, given the current environments that we're given from the construction and architectural side of it things. So there's no project ever goes 100% as originally envisioned. And so setting expectations with the client is clear, is also critical. And my bring to the client is, I'm going to set their expectations so that, look, we're going to do our best to get this, and you will hit your on-air date, because we all know that the on-air date is critical. And it's just going to be a bumpy road, and we're going to take you through it, and trust us that we know how to get there. And we will always be open and honest about what issues we encounter. But even when I encounter an issue, my goal before getting to the client is not only do I want to present them with what the issue is, but what the solution is. And I think everybody on this call has a solution in mind when they see issues. And if we don't, we work together to find the what works best for all of us in terms of maintaining the vision for what is going to eventually be seen on camera and put out to the public.
Anybody else want to follow up on Tony's comments, just on things that you would like potential customers, consumers to be aware of ahead of projects?
Yeah, I think Jim nailed it earlier when he said that, if it comes out poorly, it reflects poorly on all of us, right? So we're in it with you. We want it to be as great as it can be. We're shoulder to shoulder with you here. That we absolutely want it to turn out the best. We want to do everything we can to keep it on your budget. And as Tony said, it's offering up the creative solutions. A lot of times there's something that comes up. There's a lot of different ways to skin that cat. So, we'll get together and we could do this, and we all are able to, offer the pros and cons and come to a solution. But yeah, it's interesting. And, like in this Fox project, there's this ginormous, like office building that you're building, and we're putting a 2-level studio in the middle, and, we can't have, structural beams and columns throughout. So it's a really large open span, and a lot of things for the engineers, the building engineers, to consider, and how you're framing the floor below as well as the floor above for the loads that we need to put in there. It's not common in a lot of anywhere else in that building. You're not looking to drive a 2-person scissor lift around a 19-foot scissor lift around the floor space. So that's something that we bring up that we need to be able to do, and here's why. And they're obviously understanding about that, and it's figuring out how we can make that happen, not only with our team, but with everybody else who's working in the project.
Guys, you obviously have a lot of experience in this field, and we've talked a lot about the various projects that you've done over the years. And obviously today we're kind of focusing in on the fact that you all work together on the FOX5 DC-Studios. But what are some of maybe the biggest lessons that you've learned throughout your career? Maybe this kind of dovetails into what your previous answer was. But Tony, anything that stands out to you as being lessons learned that you now apply to future projects?
I learned a lesson on almost every project that I apply going to the future. The one thing that I came in very early when I started doing studios with Lighting Design Group 8 years ago is I never realized how much that HVAC affects a studio. And there's lots of ways to provide air into a studio. And a lot of times the initial design might be something that the engineers are looking at it more of like a corporate office space where they have to have diffusers, every so many square feet and downturns and stuff like that. And it's sort of, they may not do studios for a living, but we do. So I have to start talking to them about what's the best way for this space, for this studio, to have air flow in and out. On this past project, I've now learned that I need to also delve into the world of structural slabs and floating slabs and make sure that they're, what are they rated to hold? What are they rated in terms of what the building is? How were they designed? Were they designed? And look out for that. But there's nothing that's in a studio that I am not concerned with, from wall design, where the partitions are, slabs, steel beams, infrastructure beams, everything in some way or another affects the life of that studio. And it sort of falls on us as having the most experience in terms of building new studios and what the studio requires to sort of lead the discussion, whether it be with architects and engineers or with Scenic team.
Yeah, and even alongside with the slab design on the floor, there's then a whole other world of flatness and levelness, which are two very different things that clients don't always get a hold of, but they're very important to what we do. And there's some pretty tight specifications that we look to hold in terms of floor finishes, so that it's as good as it can be for many reasons. So we learn a lot about that, as Tony said, with the HVAC. How you do it. Also, that air makes a lot of noise. So, if you're trying to, cheat your diffusers down and put them against the wall and just run them at a higher speed, like that's not always the right answer. There's a couple of ways to go around things. And there's some experiences that we have that we can, offer up and say, oh, if you do this, you have to watch out for that. And if you do this, you have to do that. Sprinkler design's another one. Keeping the space, safe, meeting codes, and then we're putting in scenery, which can often obstruct things. So we're working with the contractors from an earlier phase, say how can you still do what you need to do and keep it safe for us and aesthetically pleasing? We know we're going to have to drop sprinklers through some scenery in places, and designing the flush covers to kind of blend in with the scenery. But that also turns into, we've learned a lot, you have to have sprinkler coverage both above and below the set, and that oftentimes increases the overall volume of the system, and the sprinklers may have to be a lot larger than you would ordinarily think.
That's really interesting. And I'm curious, just Ben, from your perspective, how important is the person that's in the role that Peter Provost was playing on this particular project? How important is having a good rapport with that person who's kind of at the hub of everything? How important is that for your job and for the overall success of a project, just in your experience?
Yeah, it's absolutely critical, because there's a lot of moving parts, and we need to funnel those through kind of one point person, and just to be able to have kind of a chain of command and follow through on stuff. So Peter's got a tough job, because he's balancing all of our needs, but also then the architect, and he's kind of in between us all, and kind of negotiating the best of both worlds. And Peter offers a unique take on that, being an architect, so he knows a lot more about what's going into the building side of things than other designers might. But it's absolutely critical, and he's doing it totally on behalf of the client, right? So it's with their best interests in mind. It's, I know they want to do this, and I know this is why we want to do this, and this is why, and then we have to come to that consensus of which path to follow and how to move on. But it ties into that, and then communicating to us, to lighting, to video, but also to the other trades. And sometimes that's hard, because the contractors, they're not working for us, they're not working for Peter. So to go in there and say that we want to do something, like, but it's got to get it's got to go down the proper paths, and Peter's got those contacts and those relationships to make sure it happens.
Tony, any follow-up on Ben's comments?
No, absolutely. I mean, Peter sets the tone. He sets the vision that we're all trying to achieve. And it's up to us to help realize that vision. And a lot of times, he's brought us to the table to these projects, and we've had a great working relationship with Peter. It's a valuable one. And on our side, I know that I sort of walk the line between construction and production, in that my job is more of the permanent infrastructure and the how we're going to light the studio, but not the actual lighting of the studio. So Peter also coordinates on our team with our lighting designer, and he's worked with a number of lighting designers at LDG on various projects. And on this project, there's a point in the production phase, or the construction phase, where we need to start bringing in our production lighting designer, and that initially happens very early in the project, much earlier than most people realize, sometimes a year and a half from the actual on-air hang and focus. In order for the lighting team, for my lighting team, to sit down with Peter and say, look, these are the shots that Peter's envisioning. Do they work? Do they not work? And how we're going to light those shots. And then, so taking the knowledge that my lighting designer has passed on to me, I can help finalize my systems design and the infrastructure. And then that LD will sort of fade away for a little bit while we actually build the space. But before we go back into that space, and as construction is wrapping up, it's time for our lighting designer to sit down with Peter and with the client and realize those shots and have the discussion about how they're going to light, what's the color temperature, which goes back to Jim Landy's, coordinating with Jim Landy on the technology, what color temperature works best with the video, what color temperature does the client expect to shoot in. And they start having those conversations, I'd say probably 3 months out before we even hang and focus on air. And sometimes we're still a construction site happening, but one thing that I've noticed over my 20 years of doing infrastructure is that the construction turnover and the client turnover dates have sort of crept together. There's no longer that 6-month period after construction where we can go in and then build our scenery and then install our technology and do our integration. those two dates have overlapped more than Ben and I would ever have thought possible and have had to deal with. And sometimes we're hanging technology in studio spaces that aren't really 100% ready, or not really clean spaces as we would hope that they would be. But in the end, it's getting that vision on camera, and it's a collaboration that I'm happy to work with Peter on, and I'm happy to work with Ben and the rest of this team on.
Excellent stuff. Well, Tony and Ben, guys, thank you so much for joining us here for this conversation today, sharing a little bit more about your particular roles in this project and how you all work together and collaborate to make something like this come to life. It's been a real pleasure. Ben Jacobson and Tony Siniscalco, guys, thank you so much for joining us here today.
It was a pleasure.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks.
Absolutely. And everyone, thank you for tuning in. We hope you found it informative and you learned a lot just about the process for creating a studio like these guys did for the FOX5 DC-Studios. And so we appreciate all of you joining us here today. Stay tuned for more content coming to you very soon from Provost Studio. But for this one, thank you again to all of my guests, and thank you out there for joining us. I've been your host today, Tyler Kern. Thanks for being here.